It's about 6 in the morning here, and it's 52 degrees outside. It's going to be 96 this afternoon. There's no air conditioner in this building, and there's never going to be one. And by 4 o'clock, this place will be sitting somewhere in the 70s while it's roasting outside. I'm going to walk you through an entire day of how that happens, in order, hour by hour. Because cooling a building without a machine is almost entirely a timing problem. It's not equipment. It's knowing what to do at 6 in the morning and what to do at 9 at night. And most people do both of those exactly backwards. Subscribe if you want more of this. I've spent a lot of summers out here figuring out which of this actually matters. And before we start, here's the sentence that the whole day hangs on. You cannot cool a building. Not without a machine. What you can do is refuse heat before it gets in, and then dump the heat you couldn't refuse at the one time of day when dumping it is free. That's it. That's the entire discipline. Everything I do today is one of those two things, and they go in strict order. Because refusing heat is always cheaper than removing it. If you get the refusing part right, the removing part is easy. If you get the refusing part wrong, no amount of fans will save you and you'll spend all summer being annoyed at your fans. And I'd say the reason most people struggle with this isn't that they don't know any of the individual tricks. It's that a house without air conditioning is a thing you operate, on a schedule, and we're not used to that anymore. A thermostat is a setting. This is a routine. Once it's a habit, it costs you about 4 minutes a day, twice a day, and you stop thinking about it at all. But for the first couple of weeks, you will forget. And you'll come home at 3 in the afternoon to a warm building and know exactly which step you skipped. So, 6 in the morning. Right now, every window and door in this place is wide open and has been all night, and the first job of the day is to go around and shut all of it. That's the move people find strange. It's the coolest part of the whole day out there. It feels wonderful. And I'm going around closing everything. But watch what happens. The outside temperature is going to cross the inside temperature somewhere around 8 or 9 this morning, and from that moment on, every open window is an inlet for hot air. Leave them open because it feels nice at 7. And by 11, you've filled your house with 90-degree air and thrown away everything you gained overnight. My grandfather, Walt, did this every summer morning of his life, and I never understood it as a kid. I'd complain that it was nice out, and he was shutting the house up. He'd say, "You're not letting the cool in, you're letting the hot in." Which sounded like nonsense to a 10-year-old, and is exactly correct. So the rule is, close it when the outside temperature is climbing toward the inside temperature, not when it's already past it. A cheap thermometer inside and one outside in the shade, and you just watch the two numbers cross. Once they cross, you're sealed until evening. And I do mean sealed. This is the part where the discipline gets tested. Because somebody is going to want to prop the door for a minute or run in and out a dozen times. And every one of those is a small deposit of hot air you'll be paying interest on at 4 in the afternoon. It's the same idea as a cooler on a hot day. The cooler doesn't fail because it's a bad cooler. It fails because somebody opened it 11 times looking for the mustard. The other thing about that outside thermometer, put it somewhere properly shaded and off the wall. A thermometer stuck to a sunlit south wall isn't reading the air temperature, it's reading the wall. And it'll tell you it's 106 out when it's 88. I had mine in a bad spot for 2 summers and made worse decisions because of it. Now, mid-morning. The sun's up and working, and this is the big one. Shade the glass. On the outside. This is the single highest leverage thing in the entire video, and almost everybody does the low-value version of it. Interior blinds and curtains, the sunlight comes through the glass, becomes heat in your room, and then your blind sits there in that heat. The Department of Energy's numbers on this are stark interior roller shades cut solar heat gain by something like 18%. Exterior shading by something like 55%. Some exterior screen materials get up around 80 or 90. Same sun. Same window. The only difference is which side of the glass you stopped it on. Once that energy is through the pane, it's in the building and it's yours. A curtain stops the light and then radiates the heat right back into the room. It's a marvelous device for privacy, and it's very nearly useless for temperature. So, awnings, exterior roller shades, solar screen fabric mounted outside the frame, a trellis, a porch roof, or the oldest and best version. A deciduous tree on the south and west sides that leafs out in summer and drops in winter, so you get the sun back when you want it. And pay attention to which walls. South glass is manageable, because in summer the sun's high and a modest overhang shades it. The one that ruins people is west. Late afternoon sun comes in low and horizontal, straight through the glass, at exactly the hour when the building is already at its hottest and you're most tired of it. An overhang does nothing against a low sun. West windows need something vertical and outside, a screen, a shutter, a tree, a wall. If you do one thing after this video, put something outside your west-facing glass. And it doesn't have to be a purchase. The cheapest version that actually works is solar screen fabric, the dark mesh stuff, stapled to a simple wood frame and hung outside the window on a couple of hooks so you can take it down in October when you want the light back. That's an afternoon and not much money, and it's on the correct side of the glass, which is the only thing that really matters. I've seen people spend serious money on fancy interior treatments, while a $20 screen frame outside would have done 3 times the work. While you're at it, look at the walls themselves, and not just the windows. A dark wall in full afternoon sun gets hot and conducts that heat inward all evening, long after the sun's off it. You're not going to repaint the building over this, but if there's a spot where a vine, a trellis, or a shrub can put some shade on a west wall, that's free, and it's permanent, and it does the same job as the window screen, just slower. Now around midday, the other half of the refusing job, and it's the one nobody thinks about because they never go up there. The attic. On a 95-degree afternoon, an attic under a dark roof commonly sits between 120 and 150 degrees. Higher if the venting is poor. That is a 140-degree object lying directly on top of your ceiling, radiating down into the room you're sitting in, all afternoon and well into the evening. You've spent all this effort on the windows, and there's an oven above your head. 2 things fix a lot of it. First, actual ventilation. Intake low at the soffits and exhaust high at the ridge, so air enters at the eaves, rises as it heats, and leaves at the peak continuously without anything powered. Gable vents and those spinning turbines are much weaker than a proper soffit to ridge setup, because they don't establish that bottom-to-top path. Second, a radiant barrier. Reflective foil stapled to the underside of the rafters, which throws the roof's radiant heat back at the roof instead of letting it soak into the insulation. 2 things matter about installing it. It has to face an air gap, because touching a hot surface turns it into a conductor and it does nothing. And shiny side down so dust doesn't settle on it and kill it. It works best exactly where I am, a dark low-mass roof in a sunny climate, and a lot less if your roof is already light-colored or metal. There's a third thing that's less interesting and probably more valuable than either. Seal the holes between your attic and your living space. The attic hatch is the big one, and it's usually a thin sheet of plywood dropped in a hole with nothing on it. That's a direct opening into a 140-degree space, and an uninsulated hatch alone can pour a serious amount of heat down into the room below. Weather strip it and glue a piece of rigid foam to the top of it. Same for any gap around light fixtures, pipes, or wiring that penetrates the ceiling. It's an hour of caulk and foam board, and it does something in both directions. You'll notice it again in January. Tell me in the comments what your attic reads on a hot afternoon if you've ever put a thermometer up there. Most people never have, and I'd bet the numbers surprise a few of you. Now, afternoon, the house is sealed, the glass is shaded, the attic's venting, and it's 96 out. This is when people reach for fans. And this is where the most common mistake in the whole subject lives. A fan does not cool a room. A fan cools a person. What a fan does is move air across skin, which speeds up evaporation, which is what makes you feel cooler. That's a real and large effect. A moving air breeze can make you feel several degrees cooler than the thermometer says. But the room itself doesn't get cooler. The motor in that fan is turning electricity into a small amount of heat, so a fan running in an empty room is, very slightly, a heater. So, turn fans off when you leave the room. Not for the electricity, though there's that. Because there is no benefit at all happening in there. And a small penalty. Sit in the moving air. That's the whole use. Two more things about fans while we're here. If you've got a ceiling fan, it should be blowing straight down in summer. Most of them have a little switch on the housing to reverse the direction, and about half the ones I've encountered in other people's houses are set for winter in July because nobody knew the switch existed. Down in summer, so you get the breeze on you. Up in winter, so it gently returns the warm air that's collected at the ceiling without blowing on anybody. And the other half of the afternoon job is heat you're making yourself. Every appliance in the building is a small heater with a job on the side. The oven is the obvious one. Cooking a meal indoors on a 96-degree afternoon undoes a serious fraction of everything I've described. That's what the outdoor kitchen is for, and it's why so much summer cooking around here happens outside or early. Same story with running a dryer indoors, or leaving a bank of lights on, or a computer working hard in a small room. It's not a huge number on any one of them, but on a sealed building at 4 in the afternoon, every watt you burn inside is a watt you'll be flushing back out tonight. And now, evening, this is the part of the day that does the actual work, and it's the part people skip. Somewhere around sundown, the outside temperature falls back through the inside temperature. The same crossing as this morning, running the other direction. That's your signal. Now you open everything, and you open it aggressively. What you're doing is called a night flush, and the goal isn't to cool the air in the building. Air holds almost no heat, and it'll all be replaced tomorrow anyway. The goal is to cool the stuff. The floor, the walls, the masonry, the furniture, everything with mass in it. That mass has been quietly absorbing heat all day, and if you don't pull it back out overnight, tomorrow starts warmer than today did, and the day after that starts warmer still. That's how a house gets into a heat wave it can't climb out of. That lag is also why the inside of a building peaks so much later than the outside does. The hottest hour outdoors might be 4 in the afternoon, but the hottest hour indoors is often 7 or 8 in the evening. Because the heat that's soaked into the structure at midday is still working its way through and arriving late. It's the same slow travel through mass I talked about with the heater. A few inches of material takes hours to move heat across. Which means the flush isn't really about tonight. It's about resetting the building so tomorrow starts from a low number. And you're always working one day ahead of yourself. Do it properly. Open low on the cool side and high on the warm side, so you get both cross-ventilation and the stack effect, warm air leaving up high pulls, cool air in, down low, without any fan at all. If you've got a loft or an upstairs window or a vent at the peak, that's your exhaust. And if you use a box fan, point it out, not in. Everybody points them in. Put the fan in a window on the downwind or upper side, blowing out, and it pulls air through the entire building instead of just stirring one room. One fan blowing out through the right window moves more air through the house than 3 fans blowing in. The reason is simple once you see it. A fan blowing in throws a narrow jet of air at whatever's in front of it, and that's about the extent of its influence. The rest of the room barely notices. A fan blowing out puts the whole building slightly below the outside pressure. And now every open window on the far side becomes an intake, and air is moving through every room between them. You've turned one fan into a whole house ventilation system by turning it around. And open interior doors. Every closed door is a wall in the middle of your air path. A room with the door shut and one window open barely flushes at all. Because air needs somewhere to go, not just somewhere to come in. This is also where the thermal mass thing gets interesting for me, personally. I made a video not long ago about the mass heater I built, 4 tons of cob and brick, and the whole point of it in winter is that it holds heat and releases it slowly. In August, that same mass is doing the opposite favor. It sits there cool from the night flush, and it absorbs heat out of the room all day. I did not build it for that. It just came with it. Now the caveat on all of this, and it's the big one. Night flushing needs a real day-night temperature swing. The rule of thumb is you want somewhere around a 20-degree difference between the daily high and the overnight low, and you want the night to actually get below the temperature you're trying to hold indoors. Out here in the dry West, that's most summer nights. In a humid climate where it's 88 in the day and 78 at night, this whole strategy loses most of its power, and I'd be lying if I said otherwise. Shading and attic work still help you. The flush does much less. And there's a second problem in humid country that's worth naming. Because it's not obvious. When you pull in warm, damp night air, you're not just bringing in temperature, you're bringing in water, and some of it lands on every cool surface in the building. So you can flush a house all night in the southeast and wake up to a place that reads a couple degrees cooler and feels worse. Because now everything's clammy. That's a real effect, and it's why the advice that works beautifully in Oregon gets argued with in Georgia. Different air, different answer. I'm telling you what works where I stand, and I'd rather say that than pretend one routine fits the whole country. Same story with the last trick, which is evaporative cooling. A wet sheet hung in a window, a swamp cooler, water on a shaded porch. Evaporation pulls real heat out of air, and in a dry climate, it works remarkably well for almost nothing. In humid air, it does close to nothing, because the air is already carrying about all the water it can, and what little you accomplish you pay for in dampness. It's the most climate-dependent tool in the box. Dry west, yes, southeast, don't bother. And there's a version of it you're already carrying around. On a hot afternoon out working, a wet bandana on the back of the neck, and a shirt you've deliberately soaked will do more for you than anything happening inside the building. Because you're not trying to cool a structure at that point, you're cooling one person. And one person is a much smaller job. Same physics as the fan, you're just supplying the water instead of waiting on sweat. It's the oldest trick in outdoor work, and it's still the best one. Now, the thing in the title. Why not an earth tube? If you haven't run into these, the idea is you bury a long run of pipe several feet down where the ground stays cool year-round, and you draw your incoming air through it. So the air arrives pre-cooled. And the physics is completely real. Field measurements have shown summer air cooled by something like 12 degrees Fahrenheit coming through one. Here's why I don't have one. When you run warm, moist summer air through a cold pipe, you condense water inside that pipe. That's not a defect, that's the system working. It's the same reason the outside of a cold glass sweats. But now you have standing water in a dark, warm, buried tube, collecting dust and pollen that came in with the air. And every breath of air entering your building passes over it. There is a well-documented history of these growing mold and delivering it indoors. And there's a secondary concern about buried pipe and radon depending on your ground. All of that is solvable. Smooth-walled sealed pipe, real slope, a condensate drain, an accessible cleanout, proper depth. People build good ones. But now you're excavating a serious trench and installing a system you can't inspect with your eyes to gain 12 degrees on incoming air, when shading my west windows cost me an afternoon and gains more than that. That's the actual argument. Not that it doesn't work, that the cheap stuff isn't finished yet. Do all the free things first, and if you're still hot, then go dig. I'd add one more thing in fairness to the idea, since I've now spent several minutes talking somebody out of a project. The people who do best with earth tubes generally aren't retrofitting them into an existing place. They're putting them in during a build, when the excavator is already on site and the trench is going in anyway for something else. At that moment, the cost is small and the case is much better. Coming back afterward and digging 100 feet of deep trench specifically for this is where the arithmetic falls apart, and that's the situation most people watching are actually in. So that's the day. Close it in the morning before the temperatures cross. Shade the glass from outside, west wall first, vent the attic. Sit in front of a fan rather than expecting the fan to fix the room. Open it all up when the temperature crosses back at night, and blow the fan outward. If you only take 2 of those, take the exterior shade on the west glass and the night flush. Those 2 are most of the result, and neither one costs anything but attention. None of that is clever. It's the same set of moves people used before there was any alternative, and every one of them was obvious to somebody like Walt, who never once in his life thought of it as a technique. It was just what you did with a house. Then we got machines, and we forgot the house was ever something you operated. I'll put a couple videos up here for you. If enough of you want it, I'll do one on the exterior shades I built for the west side, because those were a Saturday and they made more difference than everything else combined. I'm Cole Ashford. Thank you for listening.